The early morning sun cast long shadows across the regional executive airport's pristine tarmac as Sarah Mitchell walked confidently toward Hangar 7. Her heels clicked against the polished floor, echoing through the quiet morning air. At 35 years old, she carried herself with the poise of someone who had fought hard for her success. Her crisp navy suit and leather briefcase spoke of corporate excellence, but today would remind her that some people still judge books by their covers. James Cooper stood at his security post, watching people come and go through the private hangar area. He had worked airport security for 15 years and prided himself on knowing all the regular executives who used the private jets. When he spotted Sarah approaching, his posture stiffened and his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Excuse me, miss," Cooper called out, stepping directly into Sarah's path. "This is a restricted area. I'll need to see some identification." Sarah reached into her blazer pocket and produced her security clearance card, the highest level of access for the hangar. "Here you go," she said calmly, having dealt with similar situations before. Cooper barely glanced at the card. "I'm going to need to see additional identification, and what's your purpose here today?" Just then, a group of white executives walked past them, nodding casually at Cooper. He didn't stop them or ask for their credentials. Sarah noticed this but kept her composure, though her heart began to race with a familiar mix of frustration and disappointment. "I have a 9 a.m. flight scheduled," Sarah explained, pulling out her driver's license. "Everything is in order with my credentials." "Look, miss," Cooper said, his tone becoming increasingly hostile, "I know all the executives who use these hangars, and I've never seen you before. Are you sure you're in the right place? Maybe you're looking for the main terminal?" Sarah took a deep breath. The weight of the moment pressed against her chest, but years of dealing with prejudice had taught her to handle such situations with dignity. "Sir, I assure you, I'm in exactly the right place. You can verify my credentials with dispatch." Cooper crossed his arms. "I don't know about that. These are private jets for company executives. There must be some mistake." Other airport staff began to notice the confrontation. A few pilots preparing for their morning flights watched from a distance, uncomfortable but unsure whether to intervene. Among them was Captain Michael Rodriguez, who had flown Sarah's company jets many times, but he was too far away to recognize her immediately. "Perhaps you're confused," Cooper continued, his condescension barely masked. "The main terminal is." "Is there a problem here?" A voice interrupted. Thomas Chen, Sarah's chief of operations, approached quickly, having just arrived for the same flight. He had worked with Sarah for 5 years and had witnessed similar scenarios before. Cooper turned to Thomas. "Sir, I'm handling a security situation. This person is trying to access the private hangars." Thomas started to speak, but Sarah gave him a subtle shake of her head. She had handled these situations before, and she would handle this one too. Sometimes, the best lessons came from letting things play out. "Mr. Cooper," Sarah said, reading his name tag, "I want you to think very carefully about what's happening here. I've shown you my credentials, which are the highest level of security clearance for this hangar. You've let others pass without question. What exactly is the difference you're seeing?" The guard's face flushed red, but he stood his ground. "I'm just doing my job. Security is my responsibility, and I've never seen you here before." Sarah reached into her briefcase and pulled out a business magazine. On its cover was a story about Mitchell Aerospace Technologies, the company that owned not just the jets in Hangar 7, but the entire hangar itself. The article mentioned the company's remarkable growth under its founder's leadership, though it didn't include any photos of the CEO, a deliberate choice Sarah had made years ago. "Mr. Cooper," she said quietly, "my name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm the founder and CEO of Mitchell Aerospace Technologies. This is my hangar, those are my jets, and you are technically my employee, as your security company is contracted by my corporation." The morning sun continued to rise over the airport, and in its growing light, James Cooper's face began to change as the reality of his mistake dawned on him. To be continued. The silence that followed Sarah's revelation seemed to stretch for an eternity. James Cooper's face had turned from red to pale, his mouth slightly open as he struggled to find words. The morning bustle of the airport continued around them, but in their small bubble of space, time seemed to stand still. I apologize, Ms. Mitchell," Cooper stammered, his earlier confidence crumbling like a sandcastle in the tide. I had no idea. Sarah held up her hand, stopping his rushed apology. Let's continue this conversation inside, she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had helped her build a billion-dollar company. She turned to Thomas Chen, who still stood nearby. Thomas, could you please make sure the pilots know we'll be slightly delayed? The small group of onlookers that had gathered quickly dispersed, though Sarah could hear their whispered conversations. News would spread fast. It always did in places like this. She led Cooper toward her office in the hangar, her heels still clicking against the floor, but now each step echoed with purpose. Inside the office, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of the airfield. Models of various aircraft lined the shelves, telling the story of Mitchell Aerospace's journey from a small startup to an industry leader. Cooper stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, his security uniform suddenly feeling too tight around his neck. Please, sit down, Sarah gestured to a chair. She didn't sit behind her desk, but instead chose a seat across from him. This wasn't about power dynamics, it was about something much more important. Miss Mitchell, I can explain, Cooper began again, his voice shaking. Can you? Sarah asked quietly. Can you really explain why you stopped me, but waved through every other executive? Why you questioned my credentials but accepted theirs with a nod? Why you assumed I must be lost and belonging at the main terminal? Cooper's silence was answer enough. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the room's cool temperature. I built this company from nothing, Sarah continued, her voice steady but intense. 15 years ago, I was working as an aerospace engineer, facing the same prejudices I face today. People assumed I was the assistant, the coffee girl, or lost. But instead of letting their prejudice stop me, I used it as fuel. She stood and walked to the window, watching as her company's latest prototype jet gleamed in the morning sun. That plane out there? I designed its initial navigation system. The hangar you're standing in. I signed the lease when everyone said a black woman couldn't succeed in private aviation. The security company you work for. I chose them because they promise inclusive hiring practices and thorough training. Cooper's face fell further with each word. I'll clear out my desk immediately, he said quietly. Sarah turned back to face him. That's the easy way out, isn't it? You leave, I hire someone else, and nothing really changes. The same story plays out somewhere else, with different characters but the same plot. She reached for a folder on her desk. Instead, I have a different proposition. Starting next week, Mitchell Aerospace is launching a comprehensive anti-bias training program for all contractor companies working with us. You, Mr. Cooper, will be in the first group. Opening the folder, she pulled out several documents. You'll learn about unconscious bias, systemic racism, and the importance of equal treatment. More importantly, you'll help develop new security protocols that ensure safety without prejudice. Your 15 years of experience could be valuable, if you're willing to learn and change. Cooper looked up, surprise replacing shame on his face. You're not firing me. No, Sarah said firmly. Firing you doesn't solve the larger problem, but transforming this moment into an opportunity for growth and change. That's how real progress happens. She handed him the documents. The choice is yours. You can resign, or you can be part of the solution. The morning sun had risen higher now, its rays filling the office with warm light. Outside, the sounds of airport activity continued, planes taxiing, equipment moving, lives continuing. But inside this office, a small but significant shift was taking place in one man's understanding of the world. Cooper took the documents with slightly trembling hands. I'll do it, he said quietly. I want to be part of the solution. Sarah nodded, a small smile crossing her face. Good, because this is just the beginning. To be continued. The news of what happened at Hangar 7 spread through Regional Executive Airport like wildfire. By lunchtime, everyone from baggage handlers to air traffic controllers had heard some version of the story. Sarah Mitchell, who had deliberately kept a low profile for years, suddenly found herself at the center of attention. Back in her main office on the top floor of Mitchell Aerospace headquarters, Sarah sat with her management team. The wall-length windows offered a perfect view of the airport runways, where her company's jets took off and landed with clockwork precision. Thomas Chen, her trusted chief of operations, was sharing updates about the morning's incident. The security company's CEO has called 3 times already, Thomas reported, scrolling through his phone. They're worried about their contract with us. He looked up at Sarah, and social media is starting to pick up the story. Someone recorded part of the interaction. Sarah leaned back in her chair, watching one of her planes lift off into the clear blue sky. I expected this might happen, she said calmly. Have our PR team prepare a statement, but let's focus on actions rather than words. Linda Martinez, the head of human resources, cleared her throat. I've already received calls from 5 other aviation companies asking about our planned anti-bias training program, the one we haven't even created yet. She smiled slightly. People are paying attention, Sarah. Then let's give them something worth paying attention to, Sarah replied, standing up and walking to the whiteboard. She picked up a marker and began writing. This isn't just about one security guard or one incident. This is about changing the entire culture of corporate aviation. For the next hour, the team worked on developing a comprehensive plan. They would start with their own contractors but eventually expand the program to offer it to other companies in the industry. Sarah's engineering background showed in her methodical approach to breaking down the problem. Meanwhile, 3 floors down, James Cooper sat in a small conference room with Mitchell Aerospace's training coordinator. After his confrontation with Sarah that morning, he had expected to be escorted out in disgrace. Instead, he found himself helping to identify problematic security procedures that could lead to biased treatment. It's not just about checking credentials, Cooper explained, his earlier defensiveness replaced by genuine reflection. It's about recognizing our own biases and how we approach different people. I never thought I was prejudiced, but today showed me otherwise. Back in the main office, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message. It was from her younger sister, Lauren, who worked as a commercial pilot. Sis, your story is all over pilot forums. You're trending in aviation circles. Maybe now they'll finally believe me when I say my big sister owns the company. Sarah smiled at the message, but quickly returned her focus to the task at hand. On the whiteboard, the outline of their new initiative was taking shape. Mandatory training for all contractors, revised security protocols, anonymous reporting systems for bias incidents, and regular audits to ensure compliance. We need to be careful, Thomas cautioned. Some companies might see this as too aggressive, too much change too quickly. Sarah turned to face her team. When I started this company, people said a black woman couldn't succeed in private aviation. They said our ideas were too aggressive, our goals too ambitious. But look around you. She gestured to the window, where another Mitchell Aerospace jet was preparing for takeoff. Change doesn't happen by being careful. It happens by being courageous. Linda began typing rapidly on her laptop. I'm already getting responses from other companies interested in participating in the program. They see this as an opportunity, Sarah. You've opened a door that needed opening. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the office, Sarah looked at the plan they had created. What had started as an ugly incident was transforming into something powerful. She thought about all the other people, especially women of color, who faced similar barriers in their industries. Schedule a press conference for tomorrow, she decided. It's time to make some noise in this industry, real, meaningful noise. Her team nodded in agreement. They had built amazing aircraft, but now they were about to build something even more important. A pathway to real change in an industry that desperately needed it. To be continued. The next morning, the Mitchell Aerospace headquarters lobby was packed with reporters, industry representatives, and company employees. Television cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking like warning beacons. The buzz of conversation filled the air, mixed with the clicking of cameras and tapping of phones. Sarah Mitchell stood behind the stage curtain, reviewing her notes one last time. She had changed many things in the aviation industry: revolutionary fuel systems, innovative flight controls, more efficient engines. But this might be her most important contribution yet. 2 minutes, Thomas whispered, checking his watch. CNN just arrived, and Aviation Weekly is streaming live. Sarah nodded, smoothing her blazer. Through a gap in the curtain, she could see James Cooper sitting in the front row, looking uncomfortable in a suit instead of his usual security uniform. His presence was important. This wasn't about shame or punishment, but about growth and change. Good morning, everyone, Sarah began as she stepped onto the stage, her voice clear and strong. Camera flashes exploded like stars. Yesterday, an incident occurred at our hangar that has sparked important conversations about bias in our industry. Today, we're going to turn those conversations into actions. She clicked a remote, and behind her, a large screen displayed the new Mitchell Initiative for Aviation Equality. The room fell silent as she outlined the program: comprehensive bias training, revised security protocols, industry-wide reporting systems, and regular audits. But we're going beyond just policies and procedures, Sarah continued. Starting today, Mitchell Aerospace is establishing a $50 million fund to support minorities and women pursuing careers in aviation. From engineering scholarships to pilot training programs, we're going to change the faces of who flies these planes and runs these companies. A murmur rippled through the crowd. In the front row, James Cooper sat up straighter, his expression changing from discomfort to interest. Some will say this is too much, too fast, Sarah acknowledged, her voice growing more passionate. They said the same thing when I started this company. They said a black woman couldn't succeed in private aviation. They said our ideas were impossible. Well, she gestured to the window behind her, where a Mitchell Aerospace jet was taking off. They were wrong then, and are wrong now. The questions came rapid fire after her speech. Reporters wanted details about the program. Other companies wanted to know how to participate, and industry experts wanted to discuss the implications. Sarah handled each question with the same precision she used in designing aircraft systems. During a brief break, she noticed James Cooper being interviewed by Aviation Weekly. I've worked security for 15 years, he was saying, and yesterday taught me that experience doesn't matter if you're not also learning and growing. This program isn't about punishment, it's about progress. Linda Martinez approached Sarah with more updates. We've already received commitment from 3 major airlines to join the initiative. And the scholarship fund? Social media is exploding with responses from young people who never thought aviation was an option for them. Sarah smiled, remembering her own journey. That's exactly what we need. People who will look at this industry, and instead of seeing barriers, they'll see possibilities. The press conference continued into the afternoon. Between interviews, Sarah caught glimpses of conversations happening around the room. A young black girl was talking excitedly with a pilot about flight school. 2 executives from competing companies were discussing how to implement similar programs. James Cooper was sharing his experience with other security personnel. As the event wound down, Thomas handed Sarah her phone. Your sister Lauren's been trying to reach you. Apparently, her airline's pilots association wants to establish a mentorship program based on our initiative. Sarah looked around the room one last time. What had started as a confrontation at a hangar was becoming a movement. The aviation industry, like the planes it built, was meant to rise above prejudice, above discrimination, above the limitations of the past. Yesterday, she told a final reporter, someone tried to stop me from boarding my own plane. Today, we're making sure that nobody faces those barriers again. Sometimes, the worst moments can lead to the best changes, if we're brave enough to make them happen. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Another Mitchell Aerospace jet took off, climbing into the golden light, carrying not just passengers, but the promise of change. To be continued. 1 month after the press conference, Sarah Mitchell sat in her office reviewing the latest reports from the Mitchell Initiative for Aviation Equality. The thick folder on her desk contained stories of change that were spreading across the industry like ripples in a pond. These numbers are remarkable, Thomas said, pointing to a chart on his tablet. 27 aviation companies have joined our program. Security incidents involving racial bias have dropped by 40% at participating airports. And applications from minority candidates have doubled across all positions. Sarah nodded, but her attention was drawn to a particular letter in the pile. It was handwritten, something rare in their digital age. She picked it up and began reading aloud. Dear Ms. Mitchell, my name is Maya Johnson. I'm a 16-year-old black girl from Detroit. Yesterday, I visited Regional Executive Airport with my school's engineering club. For the first time, I saw someone who looked like me working on a private jet's engine. She told me about your scholarship program and said that aviation needs more minds like mine. I've always loved planes, but I never thought this industry had a place for me. Now I know it does. Thank you for making that possible. Thomas smiled. That's the 4th letter like that this week. But here's something even more interesting. He pulled up a security footage video on his tablet. This is from Hangar 7 yesterday. The video showed James Cooper, now head of the new security training program, greeting a woman in a hijab with professional courtesy, checking her credentials efficiently, and welcoming her to the facility. The woman was a new client's chief engineer, and the interaction was exactly what it should have been, respectful and professional. "He's become one of our best advocates," Sarah commented. "Sometimes the strongest voices for change are those who've had to change themselves." A knock on the door interrupted their discussion. Linda Martinez entered, carrying more files. "You're going to want to see this," she said excitedly. "Remember how we opened our training program to other industries? We just got calls from 3 major hospital groups and a tech company. They want to adapt our program for their sectors." Sarah stood and walked to her office window. Below, she could see the company's newest project, a training facility being built specifically for the Mitchell Initiative. The construction crews included several graduates from their first round of scholarship programs. "It's not just about aviation anymore," she said thoughtfully. "We're showing people how to turn bad moments into better systems." Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Lauren. "Sis, guess who's teaching at the Air Force Academy next semester? This girl. Thanks for blazing the trail. The cadets need to see more faces like ours in the cockpit." Just then, Thomas's tablet chimed with a news alert. "Sarah, Aviation Weekly just released their annual industry impact rankings. Mitchell Aerospace is #1, but not for our planes." He read from the screen, "For transforming not just how we fly, but who gets to be part of the journey." Sarah remembered that morning at the hangar, the familiar sting of discrimination, the choice between anger and action. "Bring James up here," she decided. "I want him to see this too. He's part of this story now." Minutes later, James Cooper entered the office, standing taller than he had that first day. "Miss Mitchell, you wanted to see me." "James, tell me about this morning's security operations," Sarah said, gesturing for him to sit. "We processed 47 executives and crew members," he reported proudly. "Different races, genders, religions. Every single one treated with the same professional respect. My team is even teaching other security units our new protocols." Sarah smiled. "A month ago, you were ready to quit. Now you're teaching others. That's what real change looks like." The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the office. Outside, planes continued taking off and landing, each one carrying people who might have faced barriers in the past, but now found doors opening instead. "We're not done yet," Sarah told her team. "This is just the beginning. Every industry, every company, every person who's ever faced discrimination needs to know that change is possible. Sometimes it just takes one moment, one decision, to start the transformation." To be continued. 3 months into the Mitchell Initiative, Sarah found herself standing in front of a very different audience. Instead of the usual corporate executives or aviation specialists, she faced a classroom of 30 high school students at Detroit's Engineering Academy, the same school Maya Johnson, the girl who had written her that touching letter, attended. "Before we talk about aircrafts and engineering," Sarah began, pointing to a large screen showing the now famous security camera footage from that day at the hangar, "let's talk about this moment. Who can tell me what they see?" Maya, sitting in the front row, raised her hand confidently. "I see someone who didn't let others define her limits," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Like my mom always says, sometimes you have to show them who's boss, by being the boss." Laughter rippled through the classroom, but Sarah noticed how many students were nodding in agreement. They understood because many of them had faced similar situations. Last week, Sarah continued, Mitchell Aerospace hired its 100th employee through our new diversity initiative. But more importantly, we've helped 20 other companies create similar programs. She clicked to the next slide, showing faces of various people working across the aviation industry. "These are some of our success stories." The students leaned forward as Sarah pointed out different individuals. A Hispanic woman who now led a maintenance crew, a Muslim man who had become a senior flight instructor, a black woman who had just patented a new navigation system. At the back of the classroom, Thomas Chen was typing rapidly on his tablet. He raised his hand, interrupting Sarah's presentation. "Sorry, but you need to see this. The Federal Aviation Administration just announced new industry-wide guidelines for inclusive hiring and anti-bias training. They're based on the Mitchell Initiative. The classroom erupted in cheers. Sarah felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the hot coffee she'd been drinking. This was what real change looked like, not just one company's policy, but an entire industry's transformation. "Miss Mitchell," a student called out, "is it true that the security guard who stopped you that day now runs your training program?" Sarah smiled. "Yes, James Cooper now leads our security training division. Yesterday, he gave a presentation to airport executives from across the country. People can change if you give them the chance and the tools to do better." After the presentation, Maya approached Sarah with a group of friends. "We started an aviation club at school," she announced proudly. 25 members already. We're all applying for your scholarship program next year." Sarah reached into her briefcase and pulled out several visitor passes. "How about a tour of our facilities next week? I'll show you what your future workplace looks like." The excitement on their faces reminded Sarah of herself at their age, passionate about aviation but unsure if the industry would accept her. Now she wasn't just holding the door open, she was helping others build new doors. Later that evening, back at Mitchell Aerospace headquarters, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. It was James Cooper, holding a thick folder. "Our latest training results," he said, placing the folder on her desk. "But that's not why I'm here. Remember how you said we needed to think bigger? Well, I've been working on something." He opened his laptop and showed Sarah a proposal for a nationwide security officer exchange program. Companies would swap security personnel for short periods, exposing them to different environments and challenging their preconceptions. "The old me would have resisted this kind of change," James admitted. "But now I understand. It's not about blame or shame. It's about growth." Sarah studied the proposal, already seeing its potential. This is exactly what we need. Ideas from people who've experienced both sides of the problem. As the sun set over the airport, Sarah watched another Mitchell Aerospace jet take off. But now she saw more than just planes rising into the sky. She saw barriers breaking, minds opening, and futures brightening. The incident that could have ended in anger had instead sparked a movement. "You know what the best part is?" she told James. "This is still just the beginning." To be continued. 6 months after the hangar incident, Sarah Mitchell stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the National Aviation Awards ceremony. The room glittered with the industry's biggest names, but tonight was different from previous years. The faces in the crowd reflected a transformation. More diverse, more inclusive, more like the real world. "When I was stopped from boarding my own plane that morning," Sarah began, adjusting the Crystal Award for Industry Leadership in Diversity that sat on the podium, "I had two choices. I could let anger win, or I could use that moment to create lasting change. Tonight proves we chose the right path." The audience included James Cooper, now wearing a suit with the Mitchell Aerospace Training Division logo, sitting beside Maya Johnson, one of 10 high school students awarded the first Mitchell Future in Aviation scholarships. Their presence symbolized both how far they'd come and where they were heading. "Our initiative has reached beyond what we imagined," Sarah continued, as slides showed behind her. 235 companies have adopted our training programs. Minority employment in aviation has increased by 30%, but numbers don't tell the whole story. She gestured to a group of women wearing pilot uniforms. "Last month, an all-female, all-minority crew flew one of our jets across the Pacific. 20 years ago, that would have made headlines. Today, it's just another flight. That's progress." Thomas Chen, sitting in the front row, held up his tablet. Breaking news was scrolling across the screen. Mitchell Aerospace named Most Influential Aviation Company of the Year. But it wasn't for their technological innovations this time. It was for changing the industry's culture. "My sister Lauren," Sarah shared, "just became the youngest black woman to be appointed as a flight instructor at the Air Force Academy. One of her students told her, 'Finally, I see someone like me teaching others to fly.' These moments matter." In the audience, Linda Martinez was already receiving messages from other companies wanting to join the initiative. The movement had grown beyond aviation. Tech companies, hospitals, even government agencies were adopting the Mitchell model of inclusive change. "But our biggest success story isn't in numbers or awards," Sarah said, her voice softening. "It's in the small moments. Like last week, when a young Muslim woman walked into our hangar, and nobody questioned her right to be there. Or yesterday, when a black teenager toured our facilities and saw himself in every role: pilot, engineer, executive. She paused, looking at James Cooper. And it's in the people who learn and grow, who turn their mistakes into stepping stones for others, who prove that change isn't just possible, it's inevitable when we work together. The ceremony continued with more awards, but the real action was happening in the conversations around the room. Maya and her fellow scholarship winners were networking with industry leaders. James was sharing training strategies with security directors from other companies. Thomas was discussing plans to expand the initiative internationally. After the ceremony, Sarah found herself in a quiet corner with Maya Johnson, who was clutching her own award for Outstanding Youth Leadership in Aviation. "You know what's different now?" Maya asked, looking around the room. "We're not just dreaming about flying anymore. We're actually doing it." Sarah smiled, remembering her own journey, "and soon you'll be helping others do it too." Later that night, as Sarah prepared to leave, she received a message from an unknown number. It was a photo of a young black girl sitting in a pilot's seat, beaming with joy. The caption read, "My daughter's first flight lesson. Thank you for making this possible." Sarah showed the photo to Thomas and Linda, who were gathering their things. "This is why we do what we do," she said softly. "Every barrier we break down opens up new skies for someone else." As they walked through the quiet ballroom, their footsteps echoing on the marble floor, Sarah thought about that morning at the hangar. One incident had sparked a movement that was now lifting thousands of people to new heights. "Tomorrow," she told her team, "we start working on the next phase, because there are still more barriers to break, more minds to open, more dreams to make real." Outside, the night sky was filled with stars, each one like a possibility waiting to be reached. And thanks to the changes they'd started, more people than ever now had the chance to reach them. To be continued. 1 year after the incident that changed everything, Sarah Mitchell stood once again at Hangar 7. The morning sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, just like it had that fateful day, but this time, everything was different. Students from Maya Johnson's high school aviation club were arriving for their graduation ceremony. After a year of mentoring, training, and determination, 15 of them had earned their private pilot licenses through the Mitchell Initiative Scholarship Program. Maya, their leader, had finished first in her class. "Welcome to your future," Sarah addressed the gathered crowd. The hangar had been transformed for the occasion. Where private jets usually parked, rows of chairs held proud parents, industry leaders, and supporters. Above them hung a banner reading, "Mitchell Aviation Academy, first graduating class." James Cooper, wearing his Director of Security training badge, was personally greeting each family at the entrance. His transformation over the past year had become a story of its own, from the guard who blocked a black woman from her own hangar to a national speaker on workplace inclusion. "A year ago," Sarah continued, "I stood in this exact spot and faced discrimination. Today, we stand here celebrating new pilots who will never have to face those same barriers. That's not just progress, that's revolution." Maya stepped forward, her new pilot's wings gleaming on her uniform. "Ms. Mitchell taught us something important," she told the audience. "She showed us that success isn't just about proving others wrong. It's about making sure the next generation starts with fewer obstacles." Thomas Chen approached the podium with exciting news. The Mitchell Initiative has now been adopted by 500 companies across 12 countries. But here's the best part. 4 of our graduating students have already received job offers from major airlines. The crowd erupted in applause. In the front row, Lauren Mitchell wiped away tears. Her brother pilot's mentorship program had helped train many of these students. "We're not done yet," Sarah announced, unveiling a new banner. "Today, we're launching the Mitchell Global Aviation Academy. 10 new locations, 1,000 scholarships, because talent doesn't have a color, gender, or religion. It just needs an opportunity to soar." After the ceremony, as families celebrated and photos were taken, Sarah noticed something remarkable. The hangar was filled with every kind of face, every kind of story. Young women in hijabs discussing engine mechanics. Black teenagers planning their commercial pilot careers. Hispanic students mapping out their paths to becoming aerospace engineers. James Cooper approached Sarah, holding a familiar security badge. "Remember this? The one I almost didn't let you use." He smiled. We just hired 3 of our graduates as security officers. They'll start their training next week. Linda Martinez rushed over with her tablet. Sarah, you need to see this. The International Aviation Authority just announced new global standards for inclusive practices. They're calling it the Mitchell Model. Sarah looked around the hangar, taking in every detail. Maya was showing her younger sister the cockpit of a training plane. Thomas was discussing internship opportunities with parents. James was explaining the security training program to interested students. Miss Mitchell, Maya called out, can I show you something? She led Sarah to a wall where the aviation club had created a timeline. It started with a photo from that morning at the hangar, followed by news clippings, program launches, and success stories. The final image was today's graduation. We call it the day that changed everything, Maya had explained, because one person standing up for what's right can change the world. Sarah touched the first photo, remembering the anger and hurt she'd felt that day. No, she said softly. It changed because all of us decided to make it change. As the celebration continued, Sarah stepped outside. A Mitchell aerospace jet was taking off, piloted by one of their program's first graduates. The roar of its engine seemed to announce a new era in aviation. Thomas joined her, holding 2 cups of coffee. Full circle, he said, handing her one. From being stopped at the door to opening doors for others. Sarah watched the plane climb into the bright blue sky. The best part is, this isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning of many new ones. Inside the hangar, dreams were taking flight. Outside, the sun continued to rise, illuminating endless possibilities in the vast open sky. The end. Note: there would be some more barriers to break, more stories to write, and more dreams to fulfill, but this particular story reached its beautiful conclusion, showing how one incident of discrimination transformed into a movement of positive change, opportunity, and hope.